Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of Happy Guys. This week we're going to be talking about...
Does this only apply to basic people?
It applies to everyone.
Okay.
But I'm seeing if you wanted to move to Canada.
And equal opportunity. So sit back, relax, and let us get our noses to the grindstone on this issue.
Equal opportunity is the topic for today.
You know, Guy, you make me laugh sometimes.
Sometimes?
Occasionally, yes.
Not all the time? You don't think I'm funny? You don't think I'm humorous? You don't think that I am absolutely verbally enchanting? I don't bring glee to the masses?
See, I was on board at first, but then he started talking about bringing glee to the masses, and I hopped off.
Oh, I'm not. I'm just like the social train of happiness. I distribute equally, and everyone gets a fair shot.
So are you an emotional socialist? You believe that everybody's emotions should be collectivized and then dispersed fairly?
I am a conversational socialist, and if I am equivocating my speaking to the bread of a nation, I believe everyone should be fed.
Which is why you have a podcast.
Which is why I have a podcast. I'm doing a very bad job at distributing, which also makes me like a socialist nation. So.
That reminds me.
Uh-huh.
We have a subscriber update.
Oh, we do?
We do.
Yeah?
We have officially broken the double-digit barrier.
See? After the 7, we're just going to reach the top.
10 subscribers.
10 subscribers.
I'm happy with that. I'm perfectly just giddy with that a bit.
See, that makes me happy, but it also tells me we could get more. So now I'm like, okay, we were doing this well.
We already had the 7. What are you talking about?
Well, I know we already had
That's
the
all
7.
we need.
Well,
now we're going to have 7 million.
Now we're going to have 7 million. We just need to wait.
That's how it works.
Yeah. It's just a matter of time. But yes, today's topic being... Or did you have something? You have something you wanted to say first?
I do.
Just because it's funny. Not on topic, but just because it's apparently
funny.
Humorous. I haven't heard the story.
So, the absolute worst thing in the world is when you're making tea and the tag on the end of the tea bag... I'm sure there's a name for that, but I don't know what it is. But the tag on the end of the tea bag falls into your tea. That's the worst thing ever, right? Like that's just not me. That is the worst.
Sure. Yeah. There's nothing worse than having a piece of paper in your tea.
I'm glad we agree. So, what I did was, this happened this morning with the tea that I'm drinking now.
Oh.
What I did was I just got a pair of pliers and kind of plucked it out of my tea and just let it sit there. But that reminded me that last night I did a very college student-esque thing, and I decided I was watching House of Cards, which, as we speak, the 4th season just came out this past Friday. So, people are pretty excited, and I was fairly excited. I knew I wouldn't have a chance to binge watch it really, but I was watching some of it, and I had class in an hour, and the Commons just opened for dinner, and I was thinking, I should go get something to eat. I'm going to be hungry later. Part of me was thinking, I'm not really in the mood for Commons food, so I decided to make some ramen, which, pretty natural thing to do. But I don't have a bowl. I also don't own silverware. So my plan was to make it in a mug and then kind of go from there. So I made my ramen in my mug, which turned out to work okay. And then I was looking around for something to use as silverware, and I couldn't find anything, and eventually I found the same pliers that I used for my tea scenario, and I washed them off. I washed them in the bathroom, and then came back and I used a pair of pliers for my ramen.
Pliers or steampunk training chopsticks?
Steampunk training chopsticks.
Yes.
That's totally what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah. I felt very much like a college student then because I was thinking, I don't have the decency to just own a fork. The mug I can understand because I don't really have a big room and I don't have a lot of space, so having a bunch of bowls and plates and also things like that.
But even I have a bowl.
That's true. I guess it's not that big of a deal.
No excuse.
But for me, and I never use it much.
Very improper.
I never make my own food that much, so
I now think less of you for not owning a bowl.
to be fair, I do own silverware. It's just not with me.
Just being forgetful.
That's true. Yeah, I was actually really forgetful.
Yeah, and it's pretty unfair to your possessions too, because you're not giving them an equal opportunity to work on the food you must consume. You have some that are just left at home doing nothing, and then you have the others that are privileged enough to be here and eating and such. Well, helping you eat and such.
Except none of my silverware is here, helping me do anything.
Well, I meant your
They're
cups.
all left out in the cold.
Your cups and stuff.
Okay, my cups and stuff.
They're all participating in the dishware that does the job of helping you consume items.
If my silverware were the populace in some sort of fascist society in which I controlled who did what, the mugs would definitely be the elitist patricians that I choose. Because I favor them well above all my other silverware. I really do. They're my favorite. I even have favorites among my favorites. So my favorite cups are the most privileged. Yeah.
It's bad. You're just running a bad ship there. See, the way I do it actually is arguably a bit worse. Everyone gets to work, but they're all plastic silverware. So I throw them out.
So you don't have favorites, you just have disposable...
I just have disposable citizenry.
Yeah, just expendable citizenry.
Yeah. Well, aside from the cups and plate and bowl, those stay in power.
Those have killed off enough plastic forks
Yes.
to gain your trust.
Yeah. And then, yeah. Don't have any plastic or paper bowls. So it's fine. It's good. So
well,
yes.
I'm glad this metaphor has just brought us here. I'm glad this is where we're at.
Okay, now I'm actually looking for this episode because you have some specific information that you've learned about the topic we're talking about today, so I'm actually looking to you to guide us through this sort of talk on equal opportunity.
You're looking to me?
Yes, because in this case, you've actually had some official study in a class about this kind of thing. I have general knowledge about it, so I'm sort of like, say your stuff so I can have something to say back at it. So you can say something to this wall here, and I'll have some philosophizing kind of sophist treachery that I can impose in rebuttal.
I'm flattered. So, equal opportunity.
Yes.
There is, this is a topic that, it's kind of a hot button issue, and it has been for a while. It goes along with the, equality goes, it permeates a lot of, borders. It permeates a lot of groups. It has a lot to do with race, it has a lot to do with gender, it has a lot to do with identity, which we had an episode on, if you want to listen to that. So it's kind of a hot button issue, and it's very much philosophized about. It's very much talked about, and I guess you can say that it has a lot to do with equality. Has a lot to do with American culture, which is why we have discussed this in a political class that I'm in right now called American Political Thought. And we read a article written by a man named Fishkin. I apologize to Fishkin, I can't remember his last name, but he wrote an article entitled Liberty versus Equal Opportunity, which was actually kind of interesting. Because in this article, he explains that there are three things that everybody wants, but we can only choose two of them because the two are exclusive to the third. If you have any two of the three, they automatically get rid of the third just intrinsically. So these three things that he describes, or that he proposes that all Americans want, are family autonomy, equal opportunity, and merit. So,
okay, I think I understand equal opportunity and merit, but I don't really understand family autonomy, specifically how it relates to the other two, considering that the definition here is you can have two and you get rid of one, practically.
Right. I was a bit confused as well. Even after I read the article, I wasn't entirely sure what Fishkin meant by family autonomy. It was a bit vague. But I think it ended up being simpler than what I was making it. So, merit is... Well, let's just talk about family autonomy first, and I'll explain the others. Family autonomy is the capability and the ability and the freedom and liberty for a family to act as a family in whatever way they see fit. It is the freedom for a father to raise his children the way that he sees fit. It is the freedom for a mother to raise her children the way she sees fit. It is the freedom for a couple to raise their children in whatever way they see fit, and I don't know... Oh, man. I do believe that I remember this article... I can't say that confidently. I think the article's a bit old, and it was written a while ago, but the logic in it is still... is a bit timeless, but I think Fishkin would also say that this family autonomy means that it doesn't matter what gender your parents are. I think he would throw that into family autonomy as well, as that no one can tell you what your family can look like. No one can tell you how to raise your children. No one can tell you how to form your family. I think that's another thing that he would throw in there as well. So that's kind of the idea of family autonomy, is that this family has the autonomy to do as they see please.
Okay.
Do as they see fit.
Interestingly enough, that doesn't leave me any less confused, because that's kind of what I was first thinking would be the definition of family autonomy, but now I'm trying to think of, well, how is having equal opportunity and merit, sort of equal opportunity based and meritocracy, like having a meritocracy, going to impede on the autonomy of a family?
So, Fishkin goes through each of these three scenarios in which two are picked, and explains how they exclude the third. And what you're describing and what you're wondering is that if you choose merit and equal opportunity, how does that exclude family autonomy, right?
Yeah.
Alright, so the idea that Fishkin is talking about is that merit, you get what you work for, you get what you deserve. I say that in quotes because that is a bit vague, but you get what you work for, and if you are looking for a job, he puts a lot of this context in a market context. You get a job based on your achievements and your responsibility and your ability. No one is getting a job that they shouldn't have. And equal opportunity is this idea that you cannot walk into a hospital, nursery, point at certain babies based on their ethnic background, or if you know more about their home background that they're going to grow up in. You can't point to one of them and say, I know exactly where you're going to end up, and you're going to end up, and you're going to end up. Equal opportunity is this idea that it doesn't matter where you start. You have as much of a chance as everybody else to unbiasedly do as much as them. So, theoretically, in America, this equal opportunity is the idea that a young black man and a young white man can be considered for a job equally. And the idea that Fishkin is talking about that excludes family autonomy when you have these two, this merit and equality, equal opportunity, is that if you allow for family autonomy, there are naturally going to be families who are advantaged and families who are disadvantaged. So if you have equal opportunity and you have a society based on merit, the only way to achieve that would be to raise everybody the same so that no one had any better upbringing than anybody else. Which I can see already. You're finding problematic.
That's finding a bit problematic, especially since in today's world, what we need we don't need people that generally know a whole lot of things. We need more specialists in more creative things. So we need wacky people with sort of far out combinations of degrees to fill in specific jobs or create jobs we didn't know we had yet because we're not working in assembly lines and doing the same general things and having to know the same basic information for most jobs. We need someone who's going to make a weird startup that's going to make drug testing or cancer research cheaper, and then some other dude doing something in the entertainment industry that doesn't make a whole lot of sense to anyone else, but for some reason lots of people like or something. I'm being very specific with this example. And I don't know, need somebody else who is like a philosophy major and knows international law and has a medical degree so that they'll be able to be a better employee to, I don't know, nonprofit organizations or something like that. So if anything, we need more diverse skill sets and more specialized people in certain areas as we get deeper and deeper into these different subjects and technologies in advance. We don't really need this generalized, you can only have greater skill in this limited number of things, and the only way to ensure that everyone has skill in this limited number of things if we train everyone in the same way. And more now than ever, individualized education is more important and would be more helpful for our economy in the long run. So that seems to preclude this kind of argument. How old is this? How recent has this assertion been made? Because that would make a lot more sense. If it was a bit older, then I can sort of understand it. But for now, it doesn't seem to be. I
honestly couldn't say.
Okay.
I want to say that this article was from the late 80s and early 90s, but don't quote me on it because I just don't know.
Okay.
I can't say confidently. But I think Fishkin would reply with, it doesn't... Raising children in a good way does not mean raising children in a uniform way. I think what he would say is that, yes, we do need specialization, and we do want to we do want to breed diversity and diversity of thought, and we want to give children we want to raise children in a way that lets their personality flourish, because everybody's personality is different. But the real problem is children who are raised in ways that would result in a dysfunctional person. Which I think he would say is different than saying that you're going to raise your children all the same so that they have all the same skills. I think he would say you're going to raise your children in a way that they are not dysfunctional in society. And they are all raised in the same sort of context, despite whatever race or gender or economic background they come from.
Okay.
So there's still there's still room for diversity of thought and creativity and different types of people to flourish, but families aren't allowed to raise their children in ways that makes them unreasonably biased or dysfunctional or not responsible. I think the heart of the argument is that he would say that you need to, if you're going to have equal opportunity and still work on merit and still have merit in a society, then you can't have a family have complete autonomy, because the family is going to certain families are going to raise their children worse than others.
Okay. This seems like a kind of slippery slope and doesn't exactly follow from the premise that both of these are, but assuming that it does, I can't understand the qualms that would have, because it's sort of going over what kind of things you can or can't do, and I don't know, social workers would have a lot more of a stern job, but it doesn't really seem like it It does and it doesn't seem like it, considering that it still allows for diverse ideas and thought. I mean, they're not going to make impositions and saying, you can't be too religious because this makes people not functional in society or stuff like that, unless those were rules that were made, or if there's an argument for that kind of thing being commonplace. But it sort of seems like, hey, let's expand the work and reach of social workers that are meant to help and mitigate bad situations for our community. It seems like what would be done, or for some reason that would follow from a meritocracy with a focus on equal opportunity, which doesn't seem all that bad to me, considering what you've said about family autonomy. I was thinking that you need to sort of rigidly have people acting or thinking in a certain way to make sure they're functional members of society. But it still allows for different diverse cultural backgrounds and belief systems, and for families to generally raise children, maybe not in all the ways they want, but you can't screw up your child for society. Seems to me is the thing that's being conveyed here, but I might be spinning it.
I think you're spinning it a little optimistically, because Fishkin is saying that if you want equal opportunity and a society that still has a merit, that still works purely on merit, then a family is not going to be allowed to raise their children the way they want. It's going to be very much, if we're talking... This is a governmental issue, if we're talking about that, then the government's going to have a large say in how you raise your child. So I think you're spinning it a bit optimistically, because yes, families would still be able to be families, but the government would say, no, you cannot incentivize your child like this. You incentivize your child like this because this is what we have found makes the most meritorious child. And no, you cannot tell your children this because this harbors and breeds racism or bias. And no, you cannot read your child this bedtime story because this has been found to lead children to a certain type of thinking. So I think you are being a bit optimistic, because we're not even talking implementing, really. We're just talking theoretics. But implementing it, there would be so much conflict. There would be obscene amounts of conflict among parents saying, I'm going to raise my child in this way I see fit, because I see this as being right, and the government saying, but we are working on a system of equal opportunity and merit, so if you want that, then you have to listen to us because we know it's best.
two qualms.
Yes.
Still not sure, even based on that information, that it follows that if those two are the things, meritocracy and equal opportunity, that it follows that that even has to be done for family autonomy in that case. That sort of seems like an extra thing to do to preclude family autonomy on top of having a meritocratic and equal opportunity society, as opposed to something that just follows from those two things, to be completely honest. Secondly, I'm not sure what this says about me, but when you're saying, we really shouldn't be doing those things, you should encourage your children this way, and I'm thinking, oh, what's one thing we know in child psychology that actually works best with discipline is that parents still spank their kids. So, negative reinforcement, but we already know that positive reinforcement works better and helps instill behaviors in children a lot better than negative reinforcement does. So, and I don't know, lots of stuff that used to be considered regular discipline is now considered child abuse, and I assume that as we go on, that will still be a general positive, general trend of things being taken out as, I don't know, psychologists and social workers tend to learn. It's like, oh, hey, this actually works a lot better than doing those other things. So enforcing things that are actually going to improve and shape people's lives for the better in the future doesn't seem so bad. I don't know. Telling parents not to raise their children in ways that makes them have dangerous ways of thinking, which sounds bad. That does sound bad. I can't completely defend that because it's sort of like, you need diverse ways of thought. But it's sort of like, hey, people that have done this have always had close ties or were in the Ku Klux Klan. I'm sort of like, you know what, that doesn't seem so bad that they're not doing the same things that the Grand Wizard was doing when they were a kid, so I don't know. I'm still probably spinning this positively, but I think this also because I don't see how it follows from having a meritocratic society in which you're only rewarded on how skilled you are, and then equal opportunity society, which just seems like the equal opportunity aspect to me doesn't really seem to be big enough to be its whole branch of its own. It just sort of seems like a subset of the things to make a meritocratic society. So, I don't know. One way that we do now is quotas, but I think one way that would work specifically for increasing diversity would be more blind ways of testing. Like, we know that there is a bias for quote-unquote white-sounding names in employment. There are census data and several tests done every few years or every few months for housing. There's a sort of similar thing where you see somebody, there are people that are actually turned away and told that apartments are full, that are minorities even though they aren't. You could list several studies, but just do Googling, research, and get involved in this topic. It's really interesting and kind of depressing. But if there was more blind type testing, like if you still had to supply your social security number and sort of information that you do need legally, but if you didn't have your name, so they just evaluated you if they wanted to see if they wanted to interview you based on your merit alone, and then after they decided, yeah, I probably would want to hire this person, and then they bring that person in, I feel like that would make for more diverse environments, considering we already know that black-sounding names, there is a bias against those. We already know that that's sort of a fact in society. There's this thing I was reading before, and it's actually looking at now, about orchestras in general, and that more orchestras are becoming, there are more women playing instruments in professional orchestras now because they're starting to adopt blind testing. So they won't see the person play, they'll just hear them.
Huh.
And after they've done this, there's more women now that are playing in bigger orchestras. So it wasn't as if women weren't as skilled and that's why there were more men. There was just an internal bias. And that's meritocratic. But doing things as a meritocracy sort of already helps equal opportunity, because equal opportunity isn't sort of, let's give everyone a job. It's, let's preclude these biases so that people who don't usually have the opportunity to get jobs because of all these other factors do get the jobs because they're good at it. So the way I've seen it or understood equal opportunity seems just a subset of meritocracy.
I think I've made a mistake because I didn't include a vital piece of information.
Okay, vital.
Fishkin starts his argument off by assuming that we are operating in a unequal society.
Okay.
So, yes, if you had a completely meritocratic society in which merit was the only way we valued whether or not you got a job, there would be equal opportunity naturally.
Mm-hmm.
But in the world, that isn't how it works. And I think Fishkin is trying to work a bit real world. And he says that these systems we're assuming operate in an unequal society. So yes.
So in the situation of meritocracy and equal opportunity, it's not truly meritocratic, so you need equal opportunity?
I think that's a way of putting what he's saying, yeah.
That seems like a cheap way to make this another branch, because if it's a meritocracy, that sort of implies that it's going to assuage this bias that there is already in society, and so to sort of go back and say, it's meritocratic, and we need this, because it isn't actually completely meritocratic, and so we also have this other thing that affects family autonomy over here somehow. This also probably could be a fact that I haven't read this thing.
Possibly,
sort of how I'm getting it.
Possibly, but you're coming to some conclusions that and some questions that I also brought up whenever I read the article. And bear in mind that it is oversimplified.
Okay.
But I'll try and give you a metaphor to maybe clear it up a bit, because I think you're thinking of meritocracy in a different way that Fishkin is. I think Fishkin is thinking of meritocracy more in a everybody is put on a level playing field and given the same test, and that test determines who gets what.
Oh, so a very specific form of how this is going to be. So it's a very specific kind of evaluation, and once you have the specific kind of evaluation based on this certain set of criteria and criteria alone, you're assessed to see how useful you are in society?
Well, he puts that in the context of the job market. So,
okay.
Saying in a meritocratic society, everybody would be put on this even playing field, and everybody would, be given the same test. Everybody would be given the same job interview, but certain people, because of their family background, would be disadvantaged than others. So, if you eliminate that family autonomy that creates that advantage and disadvantage, then you would have equal opportunity along with merit. And the metaphor that he uses is this warrior society that he talks about, that he thinks of, in which everybody in this warrior society thinks of the warriors of the society as the best and the most deserving of praise of the entire society. So these warriors get everything they want. They get ample food, they get training and specialized training, and because there's family autonomy in this society, the warrior families have the ability to train their children to be warriors. And the families that are not warriors, they don't have the privileges of training their children in that certain way. So whenever, he says every year, there is a day in which we take all the children of a certain age, I'm paraphrasing, but we take all the children of a certain age, and we give them a test, and we say, alright, you fight each other here, and whoever wins becomes a warrior in this warrior society. So you take the children from the families that are not warriors, who do not have the advantages of the families who are warriors, who get training and all the food that they need, and all the specialized, they are able to train with weapons, whereas the unprivileged non-warriors do not have those weapons to train with, or at least only have a very specific few, maybe, that they can afford. And so, yes, you put these two people on an even playing field and you give them a fair challenge, and you say, all right, whoever wins should be the warrior. That's his idea of merit, is that you are given a fair chance. Both of you have a chance of, no one's interfering with this setup right here. You both have the ability to kill the other. But because of one's family background and one's privileges from that family, one is obviously going to win over the other.
That doesn't seem exactly like a meritocratic type of, or equal. That doesn't seem like a very fair setup, though, because obviously it's the kids with the weapons, for one, and the warrior upbringing in this one-track-minded society that praises only warriors and everyone else can sort of eat shit. And sort of, doesn't seem to be, I don't know, that seems a bit weird.
Well, the idea is that it's whoever gets that certain position, that warrior position,
Yeah.
is the one who is most qualified for the job. So the children who are strong and have training in this already, at that point, are the best ones for the job, right?
Yeah.
So, that is merit. They are the best ones for the job. But they have an advantage because they were born into a certain family.
Okay, so this is meritocracy and family autonomy?
Yeah, that would be a society that values family autonomy and meritocracy.
Okay. I also feel as if... I'm still sort of... I understand how this works out, but it's still sort of, even in comparison to today's society, a sort of gross oversimplification of, I guess, what people usually think of when they think of meritocracy, especially in the type of economy we have today, in which there are many different ways or many different kinds of merit to be rewarded, and just because you don't fit into one doesn't mean you won't fit into others as well.
Yeah, it is oversimplified, but if you apply it to today's society, and you apply it to today's certain skill sets, then I think it still would hold a bit.
I think it would mitigate some type of biases, though, if it were still meritocratic. And, I guess in the case when everyone's in the pit, it still matters what you have. What makes it a bit unfair would be, if you said, what I'm hinging on here in the scenario is that the kids from warrior homes get weapons, and the kids from not don't get weapons.
That was a just kind of a example. In this scenario, you would put the two kids in the pit and you would both give them a knife.
Oh, okay.
But
kids with training with a weapon would do better.
What I meant was that the warrior societies can afford to buy knives and spears and swords and shields, and they can give their children all these and say, okay, train with these, and then once you're in the pit, whatever weapon you get, you know how to use it. Whereas the non-warrior society may have been able to afford a shield and a sword, and the kids train with that, and then you get into the pit and you say, all right, what weapons you get are decided randomly, and you all get spears. The warrior kid has an advantage, because the underprivileged kid didn't have the ability to train with a spear. If he had a sword, it might have been better, and he might have had a chance. But he got a spear.
Well, in that way, it would still mitigate lots of bias, and in really, really great and profound ways, too. I don't know. One example I thought about specifically, even though I don't mean to be very political, is that some things just wouldn't happen. George Bush wouldn't be president because there were tons of people who went to Harvard who got much higher and better grades in the same fields that he did. And so if it was a meritocracy, he probably wouldn't have had the opportunities to go to Harvard because there would be so many people ahead of him that would do better. Because of his family ties, he was able to go through and, I don't know. A president in today's society who was a straight C student wouldn't exist because there would be so many other meritocratists, so many others who would hold so much empirical merit in their past history of education and job and stuff. They wouldn't have opportunities simply from being a family. They would get more opportunities based on how hard they worked and tried. There would be a bias towards wealthier families because they could afford better education and stuff like that. But then the whole thing of pulling yourself up by your bootstraps would actually be something that people could do. If you worked hard enough, you actually could just rise up through the ranks if it was meritocratic.
Yeah, and that's if you take on meritocracy and equal opportunity.
Well, no, that would work in meritocracy, and because if you just had a kid from a family that for some reason, like, he saw those other kids being trained by their parents, and then he was determined to work as hard, if not harder than them, then he's not precluded from winning in the tournament because he had parents that were hippies or whatever. He could theoretically actually push past those barriers and win in the pit, because once you're in that pit, what matters is who wins in there. It doesn't matter who knows who. It doesn't matter that your dad wasn't the general of the army or whatever that the Warrior Society in. What matters is the pit.
Right. And you can see that in American society because Americans love to talk about the success story of, oh, he was born in a poor neighborhood and he worked himself up to $1 million company.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't happen very often. One
often?
reason those stories are like so sensational and popular because it's like the dream, but there are lots of preclusions in poverty and class and just gender and racial bias.
Right, but how often is a non-warrior child going to beat a warrior child? Those non-warrior children are going to be our American success stories.
Not very often, but it is very often, especially in particular minority communities. Like, we know about the sort of quote-unquote stereotype and the sort of cultural, the culture of Asian Americans towards academics. We'd have a lot more Asian Americans in places of power than we do now because of the cultural values of academia and education. If it would just be, things would look different now if we really were working in the pit and that was what decided what happened to people later on, as opposed to knowing somebody from a certain thing or being from a certain family.
I mean,
things would definitely be a lot different, and it would be a lot different for the better, I would think.
Okay, think of it this way. The pit is a very physical example, whereas our society is very mental and very thoughtful rather than physical. I mean, a lot of our society is very much physical as well. Physicality and being strong is valued. But when you're talking about jobs, I would say the vast majority are how mentally capable are you.
Yeah.
So if you take these ideas of... I'm going to tell you, if you're looking for a job right now as a first job, try to find one in which your family knows somebody, because I'll tell you that's 90% of the time that's how you're going to get your first job, is your dad knows somebody or your mom knows somebody. I mean, honestly, that's how I got my second job. My first job was...
So I got my first internship.
Exactly. That's when you're first starting out, that's kind of how things are going to work, is who you know. If you take these ideas of who you know and where your family comes from as translate those into the metaphor saying this family was a non-warrior family, but perhaps they were closer to a warrior family. They were friends. So the non-warrior child had experience with the warrior family, and so he was able to train with them, maybe. And so I guess that would be a way to translate this idea of who you know into the metaphor, is that the non-warrior child did have some training with the warrior child, so that he's then going to have a better chance than the non-warrior children. So I guess you can put it on a scale rather than just black and white and say these children have more of a chance, these children don't have a chance at all, and kind of translate those metaphors into that. But I do see what you mean, is that this pit example is very much life and death, and it's very much black and white. It's, it really does exclude any sort of biases, because it doesn't matter what you think of the person. it really just matters if you're going to kill them or not.
Yeah.
And our society, thank God, isn't like that. So it does, but the overall idea though still stands is that is the idea of merit, is that everybody is given the same test and the same conditions, and when I say conditions, I mean conditions as in
conditions relevant to the
to whatever.
I'm assuming now. Before I was like super oversimplifying it, but now I'm thinking of it as conditions for the task at hand. I'm thinking if I'm translating it to
right. So say everybody has the same employer looking for an employee.
Okay.
That's what I mean by conditions, is that everybody is given an interview, everybody is given the same interviewer, which isn't always the case, actually. But I think that would be the idea of merit, is that those are the same conditions you have. But the different conditions would be the family autonomy, the upbringing that you had, and the connections you have with whatever family you have.
Okay. Well, connections with the family you have and autonomy. I don't think the connections work as well in this case if you have a meritocratic type of thing, and I'm going to refer to you getting a job as the pit to go through the thing. So if you still have the pit, that will still kind of preclude whatever connections a family has if it just ends up that your kid kicks ass and the other kids just eats shit and pushing up daisies. And sort of like, but my kid knew the general. Well, your kid's dead, so mine's getting the job. He literally can't do it anymore. I'm very sorry for coming to the funeral. It's very...
Well,
that would be kind of... By assuming that kind of society, that would be normal, it would be expected. You would have to have no hard feelings. If you did have hard feelings, that would be seen as disrespectful or disgraceful because you knew about the consequences at hand for putting your children in the pit for this type of position.
Well,
Great and honorable thing. It probably would try and be an honorable thing to die in pursuit of this great service, to become a warrior for the greater good of everyone. I don't know. I'm theorizing on how the warrior society would be like socially and culturally. But anyway.
well, in our society, there are children who come from privileged families who are complete, lazy, do-nothing idiots who don't care about anything.
Yeah.
Who might get a job based on their family, but it's only going to carry them so far. I mean, that's just reality, is that if you get a job and you're just a lazy, burnout, doesn't care about anything kid, if you're not going to do the job, chances are you're going to be fired. In most cases, chances are you're going to be fired.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's kind of the idea there. Would you like to know the third scenario? We've talked about two.
Okay, so we talked about meritocracy and equal opportunity.
Right.
Problems with that is that they sort of seem the same. Meritocracy seems to include equal opportunity as a thing. I'm not sure that the third being impeded exactly follows, but that's debatable. Weird. And second scenario being family autonomy and meritocracy, which to me also seems kind of fine. Meritocracy, as I've said before, seems to include or have equal opportunity kind of in it, even though family autonomy will play a role in how much merit one individual can garner. So that seems interesting. I'm not sure if maybe it doesn't exactly equalize as much, but I'm pretty sure it will be a lot more equal in the types of things we want to see in society now if it were the sort of quote-unquote pit-style meritocracy. So now it is family autonomy and equal opportunity.
Family autonomy
no
and equal opportunity.
Meritocracy. So this is raise anyone however you want, and equal opportunity being we just need to keep a quota and not exactly have qualified people in qualified positions.
The concept here is that we keep family autonomy. So Fishkin's argument is that you keep family autonomy, therefore you have certain families who have advantaged children and certain families who have disadvantaged children. So there are certain children who are better for a position and there are certain children who are worse for a position.
Okay.
If you implement equal opportunity and you say, it doesn't matter where you came from, everybody's going to have the same chance at getting a position no matter where they came from, then naturally what follows is that you are going to have people who are from disadvantaged families who are given certain chances that advantaged children have, who then get picked over certain advantaged children because the society is trying to give the disadvantaged more of a chance than others because they are trying to give everybody an equal chance. In that situation, you have certain people who are getting picked for jobs who aren't as qualified as others, so merit is out the window because you pick who is the best for the job from these certain groups to give everybody an equal opportunity, but Group A is naturally worse than Group B because of their family upbringing. So, but it doesn't matter because you need to give everybody an equal shot, every group an equal shot. So, you need to pick one person from each group, and the 3 people from Group C would be perfect for the job. But since you need one person from Group A, B, and C, then the person from A and the person from B, who are worse than the other 2 people from Group C, get those 2 positions. So this idea that society is based on merit goes out the window because you don't have merit totally being employed. It's merit within the lens of this equal opportunity that everybody has a shot.
Okay.
Now dissect me.
I still have problems with this because this doesn't seem to be a case of here is the stuff at the top and here's the stuff that follows at the bottom. It still seems to be a case of these are the things and we're going to assume other things based on these things. We're not going to logically follow that these things happen from other things because some assumptions in there are that only people from certain groups are going to truly deserve the jobs or be able to do the jobs, and we'll have to hire unqualified people, which means you're assuming that if you're from one of the other groups, you're probably not going to be qualified, which is a sort of weird and not so pleasant conclusion. Because if we're comparing that today, the groups that we reuse now would be class and race, so I would be assuming that people from lower classes are less qualified to do jobs, and people from minority groups are just less. We run the risk of having worse employees because minority groups aren't as good as doing the jobs. Seems to be the kind of assumptions that have to be made there for all these things to be true.
Fishkin's argument is that, on the base of his family autonomy argument, is the idea that if you let families raise their children in whatever way you want, then certain families are going to raise their children better than others.
Okay.
And that's the basis of the argument. And I think I might have to study it a bit more. But he does, like I said, he talks about being in an unequal society. So I think he's acknowledging the inequality of races. But I think a lot of what he's talking about is naturally people raising their children worse than others.
Okay. So I understand that, but that still goes into the problematic assumptions is that, okay, some people will raise their children worse than others, and because of that, we're going to have certain groups of people that won't have as good potential employees as others. That's assuming that the distribution of how well you're raising your children will go, the majority groups we usually look at raise their children better, and then minority groups tend to raise their children worse, so we're going to end up, because that's how you get the conclusion that we're going to end up hiring less qualified people if we have equal opportunity positions. if we have to go through all groups, you have to assume that the groups we don't usually hire or tend not to hire because of biases in society will have worse employees. You have to assume that those groups are going to be worse if that's what you're going to do, because it doesn't follow that because some families will raise their children worse than others, that those are the groups that are going to raise their families worse. That's another assumption to put in that will make all these things follow. But if you don't have those assumptions, it really doesn't follow that having to pick from multiple groups ensures that you're going to have less quality, unless you're going to assert that certain groups will just have less quality employees, potential employees.
You're putting this in an American context, and Fishkin is thinking of it in a vacuum.
Well, even if it's in a vacuum, it's still, if you just don't think of it as race, then that's still the general assumption that certain groups will just be worse at raising potential employees than other groups. Because that's sort of the basis of, that's just the basis of the logic for that assumption to completely follow, unless I'm missing something else entirely. So you have Group A, Group B, and Group C that just say, this is an unequal society and we're going to institute this familially autonomous equal opportunity society so that B and C will stop complaining about Group A sort of doing everything and taking everything, and then we have these problems that happen because Group B and Group C, because some families raise their children worse than others, tend to be the families that raise their children worse than Group A. Then we have this problem of hiring more Group B and C people, like you brought up earlier, because Group A has all the perfect people for the job, but B and C, we have to cut corners on them, and that's only the case if Group B and C just have worse employees, because Group B and C are the groups that raise their children worse. So that's only the case if, when you mean by some people raise their children better or worse, you're talking about B and C and not A. But if it's just some people raise their children worse, there are people that raise their children worse in A, there's some people that raise their children worse in B and better in B, or better in B and better C and better than A. So we don't have any information outside of whatever extra assumptions are being put in there about the quality of the groups. If we just know that there are certain groups and we're having equal opportunity for the groups, and we know that in general people, so all of the groups in general, some people raise their children better or worse, it doesn't follow that we're going to have less qualified employees unless you're going to have the extra assumption that some groups are going to be worse than others in this certain case. So it's something that just doesn't follow unless you make that extra assumption. I'm not sure how you can make that assumption down the road without having that extra thing in there. But that's not what's being said in the argument, or at least not how I'm understanding it. So,
well, I think you understand it pretty well, because what you bring up is something that I was thinking when studying this as well, is that this concept that family autonomy means that certain families raise their children better than others, that's true, but it's not the only factor in who gets a job. I think it does. The argument has some basis and it has some truth in it that you can really see, but it kind of skips over this idea that it's an unequal society based on concepts that are arbitrary, like race. Yeah. So it's not that certain minorities raise their children worse than others. It's that certain minorities are considered inferior because of their intrinsic minorityness. And I think the argument kind of skips over that. That's one thing that I was really wondering about, that I wasn't entirely on board
if that's
with.
the thing that I'm thinking about, if that's the thing that is making that there's a problem of the unequal society, being that some groups are just sort of seen as intrinsically less than other groups, and so in the equal opportunity family autonomy society, we get less employed people because of this conception, there's two different confusing problems. Am I getting that right? I'm making sure I'm getting this right. So we're still talking about the equal opportunity family autonomy case. It is the case that we're still working in the confines of the unequal society. And in the confines of the unequal society, people from certain groups, like B and C, are seen as intrinsically less, either subconsciously or maybe overtly, we don't know what the society is like, are seen as less than Group A people. And we're still working with family autonomy and equal opportunity society, right?
Correct.
Okay, so if we're still working around, then the problem here is like what I had before, with one of the points being, this is the type of society is, but it's not actually like that. Where you have the equal opportunity society, but we're still viewing people as intrinsically worse in certain groups, which sort of impedes on the equal opportunityness of the society. If the point is everyone from these kinds of groups are supposed to be picked out equally and given a fair shot, then that can't really be the case if you already have this preclusion that there's going to be this idea sort of with employers that people of certain groups are worse than people of other groups. Or if, now I'm a little bit lost in what I was saying. Or my other thing was, I guess, back again to the, goodness, I really did lose what I was going to say. I'm about to say something, but I'm not sure if I'm going to articulate it correctly.
Well, I can see what you mean.
Yeah, so it's still the sort of...
Is that there are, I guess you could say, one of two switches that has to be on. Either the society has... Either in the society there are certain groups who are inferior because of the way that they raise their children.
Yeah.
Or the other switch is that these societies have these different groups chosen based on what the society sees as inferior, where that might not necessarily stem from family autonomy and the way that you raise your family.
Yeah.
And
or the fact that when you're talking about in the unequal society, some groups are seen as inferior as others, so you either have to do those two things, or you have to basically preclude the fact that it's an equal opportunity society, which then just makes a contradiction and crumbles the whole thing. So it's sort of like you need these other assumptions, and if these other assumptions aren't said, then these are sort of implicit things and are sort of a bit troubling in context, because I assume that what people are doing when they're reading Fishkin is applying this to the actual society that they live in, because why else would you write this thing about society as an equal opportunity if you weren't going to try and use it or think about it in a practical sense? So then it somewhat translates to, oh, we can't really have meritocracy if we have equal opportunity in affirmative action, which is troubling because sort of like, oh wait, affirmative action is making sure that qualified people of color get jobs that they were not previously getting, so, oh.
Yeah, and that's one problem that I saw with that. The article did seem a bit too theoretical and too in this world of theoretics, because it doesn't... I don't think... It would almost have to be that Fishkin was thinking in an American context, because I am fairly certain that he is an American, and so that's what he would be thinking of. But yeah, it does just kind of skip over this idea of bias, because he just assumes that certain families raise their children better than others, and the families...
Well, it's
families who raise their children worse are going to be grouped together, and the families who raise their children better are going to be grouped together, when in reality, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah.
And I think that's an assumption that he might be making that just doesn't apply to the American context. We have biases that are unreasonable and don't apply to, these families are raising their children worse, and therefore we group them together. It's not how it works in the real world.
Yeah. I'm saying there's what I was just about to say, like, sort of, sorry, almost cutting you off, is that...
That's fine.
Like, the things that he's saying in particular, like when he's laying out So I don't think any of the premises that he's laying out are contradictory. What I'm getting at is basically the conclusions that are being reached by the premises in question are just missing some factors. And if we're going to assume they're true, we have to have these implicit things because they don't exactly follow from it. So it is true that, like, some families raise children better than other families do. But then it's not the case, as I've said before, that means that only this group does that and other groups do that. Though, I wonder if this was addressed at all, is that statistically, if you have a larger group as opposed to a smaller group, and there's, like, some probability, some true general probability of the percentage of families that are going to raise their children well, and worse, if you have a larger group, you're going to have a group that's closer to that probability. If you have a smaller group, you're going to have a higher amount, or they're going to be less conforming to that thing. So, like, if you flip coins 5 times, you could have a case where you have 4 heads and 1 tails, but the probability is 50-50. But if you flip it 500 times, then you're going to have something closer to 245 and 255, those kinds of coin flips. So he could say, if there was this one thing that I could point out, I could give him that maybe in smaller groups, there might be, in comparison to the larger groups, it could be the case that there is a subset of those groups that do raise their families worse, but that's a matter of, I guess, just probabilistic nature of things. But then it could also be the case that in those groups, you have just quote unquote irregularly high of people that raise their families well if we're just looking at this sort of arbitrary group where it's a smaller number and it can be swayed farther away from the true probability of good family, bad family rearing. So there could be a point there, but there's still sort of counter of, well, it could easily go in the other way too. So it's sort of like, it's a weird coin flip and you have to make these other types of assumptions and things to get what you want.
Yeah, and I don't think that Fishkin would apply that to his argument because, again, like I said, I'm fairly certain that he's working in an American context, and America is a vast, huge nation. So I still think that there's just this problem with that argument that I can entirely come to grips with. Although I do think that there is a bit of truth to what he's saying. I think it's he's operating in a black and white world, but no pun intended. He's operating in a black and white situation, but in the real world, nothing is 100% one way or the other.
Yeah.
No one ever has a 100% equal opportunity, 100% family autonomy, and 0% meritocracy. That's not how things work. And he, at the end of his article, he acknowledges that this is the case, that in the real world you don't have both of these and then another. You have mixtures, and I guess it wasn't too long of an article, so it wasn't a vast application.
Discourse labeling different situations, going like, this is exactly how it's going to be, and I'm just trying to condense political thought into 3 axioms.
Right, and so I think that plays another part, is that it was very broad and very general, and I don't think that it can be applied too heavily to the real world, but there are some grains of truth in there that I do think.
Yeah. I think my main problem with it is the fact that I sort of consider equal opportunity to be a subsweat. All this talking.
It's all the sweat that is gathered in a submarine.
No. I was thinking.
They put it together.
Oh, I was thinking subsweat was a subset of sweat. So you have the sweat. You have all the sweat gathered in one place, and then someone takes like a bucket, and they get set and say, "This is a subset of the sweat. Sweat."
So it's a subset of sweat.
It's a sub-sweat.
It's a sweat sub-sweat.
It's a set of sweat that's a sub-sweat of sweat.
I wonder if that sub-sweat is disadvantaged.
Well, I feel like anyone near the sweat is disadvantaged.
That would be disgusting, wouldn't it?
It'd be really
just
disgusting.
getting all the sweat
Just getting
gathered
all
together.
the sweat. I'm just imagining an Olympic-sized pool full of sweat.
That's disgusting.
Oh,
That's terrible.
oh, goodness.
We were talking about serious things.
We were talking about a serious thing. What was I saying? Oh, subset. I think of equal opportunity as a subset of meritocracy. In the fact that if you just have meritocratic things or stuff in particular, then you're going to have equal opportunity as a result of that. Because that's not assuming that certain groups that would benefit from equal opportunity are sort of less or worse or better than other groups. So then you're going to have more or less more diverse fitting if you just go, what do you know how to do? I know how to do this. Oh, that's okay. That's cool. You can do this job, Michael, or Daquan, or Mao. Doesn't matter.
I don't think Mao was a great example.
What do you mean? That's a name.
He wasn't a good guy.
That's a name. Well, not that one. No, not that one.
That's where my mind shot.
A different
we
one.
apologize to anybody named Mao. That's just pretty bad.
Oh, yeah.
I apologize. I mean, I don't know much about the Asian community.
I know
Maybe
Lee.
it's not a huge stigma.
When I say Lee instead. I
Lee,
don't know.
okay, we can go with that.
Yeah, maybe. Safer option based on our ignorance.
You know, there was a General Lee once.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
I'm glad I said that, because that needed to be said.
This reminds me of something else. That's not exactly... But it's not... It goes against meritocracy.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it might play into family autonomy and equal opportunity scenario, but undercuts meritocracy a little bit, but not completely. Okay, so, Canada. You know they got their new liberal hunk prime minister... Well, president. President? Prime minister?
Prime minister.
Prime minister. I had it right the first time. They got their new cool, hot, liberal prime minister, Justin Trudeau. Political heartthrob. So anyway, I was about to write this post, but I forgot about it because with the election and Trump, everyone's sort of been joking around and saying, I'll move to Canada. I'll just... and whatever. And so I've sort of been in that same boat of joking around. It's like, I'll just go over to Ontario or something. But I've actually had a moment in which I was seriously considering moving to Canada. It's going to seem a bit strange. I'm going to explain this eventually at some point. Because of this thing, apparently Canada's going to test out... I can't speak. Maybe it's because I'm thinking of him. He is an attractive... For politicians, he is an attractive politician.
You've hit this a couple of times.
I've hit this a couple of times. Okay.
How many times have you hit that?
Well,
that's what I want.
I mean, I live in...
Is there a secret...
Wisconsin isn't that far from Canada.
Is there a secret back door to the Prime Minister's residence that we don't know about?
A secret back door to the Prime Minister's
Does
back
the Prime
door.
Minister have a secret back door?
So
why did you consider moving to Canada? Can you tell me that?
Okay, so anyway, considering moving to Canada because they're thinking of testing out this thing called a basic wage, which I think a lot of hardcore red capitalists would hate.
Does this only apply to basic people?
It applies to everyone.
Okay.
But seeing if you wanted to move to Canada?
Not basic.
Okay.
It's not.
But anyway, so a basic wage is basically just by being a Canadian citizen, you have a stipend for every month. And so you just have this basic amount that you're actually given to use as you please by the government if you're someone living there. Now, that requires a lot higher taxes to do because everyone's sort of participating more and a lot more government involvement. And while I thought of that and didn't think, I don't have to work, what I was thinking is, this is actually a kind of thing that I've talked about with other people that would, if it could be implemented, would basically eliminate poverty as we know it today. And if I could participate in a system that basically is able to insist and help everyone at every level, so if someone else falls on hard times, they can still sort of rent out a cheap, crappy apartment. If they wanted to, they wouldn't have to go and live out in the street because they're guaranteed this basic thing. They wouldn't have to worry about certain health or programs. It wouldn't be disenfranchised because of the situation they're in. There is a government safety net to help those kinds of people on a whole systemic level. And I was thinking if I could move to Canada, I could participate just in a process that I would really enjoy being in. And then worst case scenario, if something happens to me, then I know that I don't have to worry specifically about something like that. So it's not a definite thing. There's doing some type of testing, maybe in some small county or something, you see how it works out. It may fall over, but the fact that that kind of thing is being pursued, this is the kind of sort of social governing thing that I sort of like talk about and see, wouldn't it be great? And it's a great response to something in particular that I had a specific conversation about that I feel like we should go back to, that I touched on a little bit in our technology episode, is that in the age of automation, where robots are going to take a whole lot of jobs in the future, what is it going to be like if employers are basically like, I can increase my, like, the money that I have if I just make robots do all the work, and it's easier, you don't have to deal with people making mistakes or anything, and they just have fully automated services. You're going to have a lot of people that just won't have service jobs to do where they regularly would be able to do them. And so that would fix that problem, or at least help fix that problem, or is that people that are willing to work and do things just aren't given the opportunity to work on those things because of advancements in technology and more jobs being taken by these types of things. Is that then we're not like, oh, the robots took your job, I guess you're homeless now. It's, the robots took your job, that's kind of sad. Here's something so you can still support yourself and find something else to do. So I'm just sort of like, oh my goodness. Kind of love you a little bit more, Trudeau. Even though I'm pretty sure it's not just him. I need to be a lot more, I guess, cognizant of everything that's happening in the Canadian political arena. Since I'm starting to think a little bit more seriously about something far, like a bit far off into the future. Like, I don't think I'm going to go and study in Canada and get as far as I can. If anything, I'm probably going to finish education here and maybe think seriously at some point about moving, because it seems just things. Canada's looking very attractive.
It's funny you bring that up.
Yep.
Because in this same American political thought class,
Yep.
we just discussed this last week. Yesterday, in fact, we just discussed an article that describes this system that you've just described.
Yeah.
Which was described as, correct me if I'm wrong, it's egalitarian, correct?
Not exactly sure if I would say it's just egalitarian. Because that's usually what you say when you're sort of like equal between genders and we're doing this kind of thing. Egalitarian societies, it's what people say when they don't want to say feminist. They want to say I'm egalitarian because they don't know what feminism means.
Well, I think in this article that we read,
but I guess more equal society is the basic gist of it.
His concept of egalitarianism is that no one is given an extreme amount of money one way or the other. No one makes extremely little and no one makes extremely a lot. It's all very much, if you earn more, you make more, and if you earn less, you make less, and professions play into that too. Certain professions make more.
Yeah.
But on the whole, things aren't extreme. The grouping is very, very tight for pay. So I think that's a bit similar to what you're saying.
Well, not exactly, because
not exactly.
Because what's
but
not being
it made me think of it.
said here is you can't make this much money. It's if
Right.
you are alive and a person, you get this much, so you can basically a basic living stipend. It's like the government giving you an allowance. It's like, thank you for being a citizen, or something like that, if you want to put a positive spin on it.
Right, yeah. Now that you mention it, I think just that concept kind of brought to my mind the other argument, so...
Because it's sort of covering that lower bound of what you're talking about. Is that you're not going to be in a position where you don't have an income, or you have a very, very low. I think the thing they were talking about in the article, I was reading on Mike's article telling me about this, is that the stipend would be like around $2,500 a month. And then that's what you would get.
Quite a bit.
Yeah. And so that's sort of like basic stuff. You could live in a sort of cheap apartment and eat and stuff and live comfortably without anything truly extravagant in your life. Unless
live
you like...
comfortably, I say in quotes. I mean, that is $2,500 a month, is what you said?
Yeah.
So that's about around 30,000, 31,000, I believe. Yeah, so that's poverty. I believe that's below the poverty line. I believe...
Well, if it's like for one person, you could see that someone could make ends meet if they had to do that one person.
You can make ends meet, but life isn't going to be comfortable.
Yeah. If you had a family, that would be hard to do.
I think what honestly attracts me to this idea a bit is that it eliminates a certain fear that I am going to lose my job and then what? It eliminates the certain fear of how am I going to feed my family, which I do think is a good thing. I mean, yes, I lose my $100,000 a year job, and now I have to cut my spending by 80%. This is terrible, but the concept of my family is going to live on the street and starve to death isn't really
It's not as
in
palpable.
place.
It's not as...
Right. So...
And then plus it wouldn't just be you, I guess. If it's just on an individual basis, then you and your wife would have a combined income of $60,000 if you had a family. That,
I think, might be true, but I think what might be more plausible is that there is you get a certain amount based on your status, so...
Maybe.
So married couples maybe get $50,000.
I'm not sure. Well, the way I understood it was just a flat thing. It's a flat $2,500 a month per person, and I'm not sure if there are different stipulations for whatever. If anything, I would think if you were married, maybe nothing would be changed. Maybe a little bit less. Actually, that does make a little bit of sense. But if you had a family, maybe your stipend would be a little bit more, because they're like, oh, you're raising children, you're not just feeding yourselves and stuff.
Right, so what I'm thinking is, single, you get $2,500 a month.
Yeah.
Married, you get a little bit more, but not double, because theoretically, your rent is paid, and the increased expense is food and clothing, consumables. But you have a place to stay. And so I'm thinking maybe not doubled, but a little bit more. And then if you are married and you have children, depending on how many children you have, then it becomes over double, is what I would think. Because then you have to provide for 3 different people rather than just yourself.
I'm not sure it'd be over double, because it's not exactly... Because, like, 30,000 is still poverty.
Right, yeah.
So it's more or less, it's not really sort of, I'm going to make sure you don't have to work ever again. It's sort of like... Or making sure that you don't have any serious fiscal issues because of whatever your situation is. So it's sort of like a sort of base pay or allowance that's sort of like, here's a little bit of a safety net a bit. That's going to be worth a little bit less than we're thinking now because of the type of taxes that would be required for it. So it would be even less than the amount of economic freedom you'd have now. Thinking if it was just $2,500 and there wasn't a difference in how money was, basically.
Right. And the real problem that I have with it is, there are 2 problems that I have. The real problem is just the taxes that would have to be put in place. I know people wouldn't be happy with that, and I I don't like the idea of high taxes. I enjoy whenever people make a lot of money and then they get to keep that money.
But our zoos and stuff. But our zoos and museum and stuff.
Yeah.
They're cool, right? Cool if they'd
But
be cooler, right?
But the amount, if you wanted to do this on a national level, which I would imagine would be the end goal,
Yeah.
the amount of taxes you'd have to put in place would be astronomically high for 400 million people.
Well, I think the thing is then, if you have the higher taxes, you then have the social services and infrastructure to support those people if they are paying higher taxes.
But I'm just saying that this money would be going to the stipend, the money that gets allotted
just for
to people.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. That amount of taxes would be a pretty big increase, and I'm not sure if I'm comfortable with that.
It'd probably be a somewhat proportional thing in which people that were richer would probably pay a lot more than on taxes in general.
Yeah.
So that probably will be taken off. It'd be one thing to go like, hey, you know that $2,500 you get a month? Let's take half your income so you can keep getting that.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I'm sure it will be graduated, which is partially what we adopt now in this nation.
Yeah.
But I'm not comfortable with the idea of raising taxes in a somewhat astronomically high level. I don't know. I think for me it would be a bit of a numbers game to see
it's like
how
much extra would this cost me?
Exactly, and I could honestly see it working on a bit of a donation base, because then you get companies. You essentially offer a product to companies. Because,
so then it's like just a national base pay fund, and then you can get tax write-offs for donating to it.
Yeah, and companies could then get the product of our company donated to this much to this that keeps people in a social safety net. Don't you think that we're so great?
Yeah.
Look at how awesome we are. So I think that might work a bit more than making people pay more, because tax evasion is already a problem. I hate tax evasion. I really do. Like, all you people who think that you don't have to pay taxes, go move somewhere else. Don't live in my nation.
But the taxes are too high, though. I don't want to pay taxes that are too high.
As it stands right now, taxes aren't too high. Okay, they aren't. They just aren't. Just face it. You're greedy. You just want more money. Not all rich people are like that. I've met plenty of good, kind, loving families that are rich. But you people who just have this mindset that you need to have more money and you're going to say, well, screw you, government, I'm going to not pay my taxes. You live a terrible life. And I want you to know this. Because,
you lose one subscriber.
Because, well, screw them. My life is better than yours because my life does not center around this idea of saving as much money as I can. So, take that where you might.
Oh, you got a little angry there.
What was I talking about?
I was a little bit scared. I mean, it wasn't very loud. It was sort of like a quiet, seething anger. You're sort of like...
It irritates me. It irritates me when people think that they don't have to pay taxes, as though there's some sort of special Ubermensch that just doesn't have to, that is just above us all. You are right down here with us, pal. You are a person. You are a human. You're going to die just like we are. You're not going to take your money with you.
Where do you think equal opportunity goes into this Fishkin trifecta?
What do you mean?
The space... I'm not sure what I said. Where do you think...
I don't know what I said. I'm just saying things.
I'm just...
No.
Alright. Well, what do you think... Where do you think this basic pay contributes in this Fishkin trifecta of equal opportunity, family autonomy, and meritocracy?
That is not what you said at all, but...
That is not... I know, I'm
much
aware.
less confused now. I would think that... I'll have to think about this for a little bit.
Just think about thinking about it.
I'm thinking about it. I would say that it doesn't entirely have a direct effect, because this trifecta of family autonomy, meritocracy, and equal opportunity is applying to a talent and skill-based world. It's not really applying to the financial world in the sense that everybody's getting a certain stipend so that they don't starve to death.
I think it's a bit related though, because part of
how
we think of
explain
market,
it because I think you
market and
have
opportunity is what I'm thinking in particular. Is that one of the driving forces for competition in the economy and market is the fact that if you don't have a job, you are going to have no money. So then this idea or conception that to get a basic, almost living wage, you don't actually have to do anything in particular. You could try and find a comfortable situation in which you didn't have to work, conceivably. So the fact that you don't have to do anything and you're entitled by the government to get this basic amount of money sort of precludes a bit of economic theory in the fact that you're doing this so you're not homeless, basically. And if you don't have this sort of conditioning or incentive to not be homeless, you are then incentivized not to work.
That's actually the other problem that I have with this is that again it would be a numbers game for me, because if you're giving people enough money to where they can not work, that makes me a little irritated.
But does that mean that they won't work because they cannot work? I mean, certainly some people
would take this money and not do anything and just not care. There are certainly people there who would, but there are also, I would say that the majority of people, again, play a numbers game, but the majority of people would be looking for a job whenever they had this stipend, because the majority of people, I would say, get more value out of a job than simple cash. I'm sure plenty of people get a certain pleasure of, I did this job and I worked this and this is what I've done.
Plus, it would free up more people to think about what kind of job they want to have, as opposed to just thinking about how much. I mean, sure, you're not going to be living extravagantly if you just don't work, obviously.
Right, and that's another thing.
You sort of you're mitigating this fear that you have to do this job because of just what it pays, because you have this extra bit boosting you up anyway, and you don't have to be concerned about, you don't have to be as concerned as a dead-end job. If you're not as worried about how much money you're making, then your concerns are switching. They're a bit higher on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're thinking less of the type of substantive or material stuff you need, you start thinking about what kind of stuff do I like to do? Or what is the kind of job that will actually make me happier or make me feel more fulfilled if you don't have this underlying worry of not being able to pay certain bills or not being able to live in a certain place.
Right, and I think the type of people who wouldn't care to work and wouldn't think about working as something to do anyway are, like I said, play a numbers game. I don't think they should be given enough to live comfortably, per se. I think they should be given enough to not starve, and the way I'm thinking of it is perhaps you are on this stipend and your son, who is 35 and he's an engineer and he's making quite a nice considerable amount of money. You got laid off at your factory job and now you have this stipend and you're not going to starve, but you're thinking, I'm not going to have a place to stay, so son, can I move in with you? I will pay you this amount of money to help with my things. I will shop for the groceries so you don't have to worry about that. So that's kind of the way that I'm thinking of it, maybe, is that perhaps you don't get enough to live and certainly not live comfortably. But you have enough that you don't starve, and you if you have a family, you have enough to relatively support them.
Yeah. One thing I'm worried about or thinking about. Oh, wait, sorry. No, you finish your thought first.
Okay. Because there are certain people who would, if they could, they would quit their jobs and not care, and because they don't want to work anymore, and they would just want to have this stipend and just not have any worries in life. And I don't know. I don't enjoy the idea of paying into that lifestyle.
Okay.
So I don't enjoy the idea of having a living stipend.
I do recognize that, and I also don't like that, but I'm thinking the vast majority won't be like that, so even if I have 1 or 2 bad eggs, there are like 20 at least, in comparison to those 1 and 2 that aren't and are actually using it. So I'm like, I'm benefiting more people than I'm just enabling, so it's fine. I also thought of this one thing. I'm not sure this would be a thing that Japan is a more social, I guess just a more social nation than America in particular, but I'm not sure if they would adopt a basic, or if I don't know if they do. I don't think they do. I don't think they'd adopt a basic stipend, or what is it called? Basic wage, or something like that.
Like a living wage, or
like a basic living wage, like that, like what's being proposed in Canada right now, because there's actually this sort of specific problem that doesn't affect a large portion, but large enough that it's actually sort of a almost uniquely Japanese problem, though it does happen in other places in the world, in which you have people that are called hikikomori, or hikikimori, which is like hikiki. So the thing about that is that you have people that develop an anxiety and break down under societal pressures, and they don't want to participate anymore, and they stay inside of their homes for weeks or months or sometimes even years. And it's a bit of a problem because if you're young enough and you live with your parents, what happens is that you end up living in the home for a really long time, and then there's a general stigma if you don't take care of your children, and there's a general stigma if of sort of letting them out there into the world, so you sort of keep them in and still take care of your children, even though they're not working. And then you have this person who sort of doesn't have any marketable skills and sort of stays inside of their parents' house for an extended period of time. And there are actually specific training programs for people because they sort of have long periods. So someone who's hikiki, or I'll look this up so I can get this right. Hikikomori.
hikikomori. Okay.
Hikikomori. They won't stay in for their entire lives, though I guess there hasn't been. I'm not sure how long this has been a documented phenomenon, but they'll stay in for like a period. The long period would be like 3 to 5 years, and you'll have like a generation of these individuals who are minority in the whole population, like a very small subset of the entire population, that sort of come out. And then you're sort of like, we have all these people who don't have a lot of skills that want a job. Yeah. In this sort of fast-paced, stressful, you have to work long hours to just be at the norm of society. So I'm not sure if that would be a helpful component that would be adopted there specifically because of that sort of specific cultural problem.
Yeah, I could see that problem maybe being cultivated a little bit with the stipend idea, because then you are giving, again, numbers game, but you would possibly be giving these people parents, I say parents in quotes, for a lifetime. They wouldn't have any reason to come out of their homes.
You could, if you wouldn't mind living in a very small, cheap place, you could conceivably just live in a small, cheap place that costs not that much a month. Save up a little of what you get every month to like buy some type of accessory or thing that you would want, a Christmas present or birthday present to yourself or somebody else if you wanted to. You could have internet connection and be able to have feasible entertainment and live a very modest but sustainable lifestyle just on that. It would be very like, and sort of poor and bedraggled and whatever, but you could have sustainable life on this very meager wage if you were alone and not an appreciator of finer conditions. It's conceivable.
Yeah, and I guess an argument to my concerns would be that the particular personality that is okay with this lifestyle is the certain personality that we wouldn't necessarily want working anyway. There would be people who are unreliable, who don't really care. I mean, I understand that no one entirely cares about their McDonald's flipping burgers job, but I'm thinking of these people as the kind of people who don't even care enough to say, I'll show up to work consistently because that's a responsibility. So I think that particular personality might be the kind that does this, and so we don't necessarily want them working anyway because they would be more of a hassle than a benefit to any certain company.
One problematic thing that I thought of is that if you had these people in a sort of a way where they could be in stable environments, sort of alone and closed off from everyone else, and not active participants in society, but still sort of being a stable citizen that's not going to, like, has had trouble of dying or being unsheltered, is that, I don't know, you could sort of, I guess, miss out or find it really easy to ignore these people if they're all sort of in the same sort of location.
Oh, definitely.
And, I don't know, that seems a little bit troubling, because those kind of seem like people at a certain level need some sort of help at some point, because you could see someone going through some type of psychological trauma or maybe a deep depression, and they're just sort of always alone and aren't sort of pressured to go out and to go into society. But then, I don't know, that seems like a problem we have today anyway. But actually, I guess it still is a bit better in there, because in their case, they at least can still be around and not in squalid conditions and able to receive help. But I don't know, someone who is not undocumented, but like homeless and sort of ambling around, maybe not be as readily able to receive type of help or treatment as someone who is in a more stable condition for several like different kinds of reasons. And I don't know. You might have two people who are like suffering from depression, but in one, because of their depression, they're homeless, and in the other one, they're at least able to make ends meet and sort of survive. So it still sort of is a safety net for people that are in at-risk situations.
But on the other hand, it would make that situation not as much of a problem, so there wouldn't be as much of a motivation to get help.
Well, I'm not sure making a situation worse is going to propel someone who is at risk to do more. If anything, it's just going to burden them more and make it harder for them to do anything in particular.
But in the back of their mind, they would probably be thinking, if I don't get out and do something, I'm going to lose my home. And therefore they get out and they work and they at least make an attempt, whereas in this other situation, there wouldn't need to be any sort of attempt. They would say, well, I'm just not going to work, and yeah, I have to downgrade a bit, but it's better than working. And so there isn't any sort of driver to get help necessarily. And I understand that depression itself is a motivator and a driver to get help, just intrinsically. But this added idea of, if I don't get out and function, then I'm going to lose my home. Whereas in this situation, I don't have to go out and function. I can stay in my room and not try to interact with anybody whatsoever, which undoubtedly would make things worse. Because...
Well, I don't know. I'm thinking that same person who isn't, like, out of work. I'm thinking of two people in the same situation of not having work. So then I'm thinking of the depressed person, or the person with untreated mental health issues who can support themselves, as opposed to the mental health person with mental health issues who's the homeless person pushing around the cart asking for money.
Right, yeah. And that's...
And I'm not really expecting someone to be... If someone has something lower on the hierarchy of needs, whether it's like food or shelter, I'm not expecting them to go and pursue things that are higher up unless they have those basic things fulfilled. In general. I mean, they can, and it's certainly possible, but it's sort of, as a general rule of thumb, I think it's a bit strange to expect people to go for higher things, like find out what it is they truly want to do in life when they're worrying about what food they're going to have this week.
I don't think those things are mutually exclusive.
Well, I don't think they're exclusive, but I think it might be unfair to ask someone to think about what you really want to do in life and what kind of career you want when the day-to-day issue they face is, I'm hungry and I'm not sure what I'm going to eat tomorrow. Why should I think about what's the best job that's going to suit me when I need to worry about how am I going to make it to tomorrow?
Yeah, I can understand that.
This is a bit more of a somber turn than I thought it was going to be for this, especially since I was so excited about the basic wage at the beginning of this portion of the podcast.
Yeah. I'm just... This is a new concept to me, and it's something that I'm trying to wrangle down and understand. Because it would be good for mentally unstable people to have a safety net for if things really do take a bad turn. But I guess I don't like the idea of a possibly voluntary sanitarium. Because if these mentally unstable people have everything they need, and they decide that they don't want to go out too much, and they decide that they want to stay in their safe little zone, which would probably happen more than a bit, then...
I mean, there might be people who are perfectly fine, but what makes them happiest isn't working. They're just sort of like, I don't have to do this, and I can live sort of comfortably if I'm willing to give up some extravagances. I'll just do that. And there are going to be a handful of people that do want to do that. And it's sort of like, well, my taxes are a bit higher. For the most part, I'm supporting people that do want to work. And you have these one or two off cases of people who may end up in this situation where they're, for whatever reason, willingly not working. But as long as that thing is in the gross minority that it probably will be, and I'm helping support most people that do want to work and have fulfilling lives in the way that we usually think of it, I'm all for it. So I do recognize that that's a problem, but I don't think that it's nearly as many people that I'm thinking every person, like half the population is going to go out of work because no one has to, and then there's a big problem with that. Or even a significant amount of population, like, I don't know.
Yeah, and I think an overall problem that I've been kind of working at is that there would definitely be social consequences with living in that lifestyle, because chances are you would be looking for places of equal monetary value as the other people who were on the system. Yeah. So all of the mentally unstable, all of the unable to work, all of the lazy don't want to works would be grouped together, and I think by a society as a whole would be seen as very negatively. So there might be a
social stigma of just living off of.
Exactly, yeah, and not working, and regardless of whether.
So basically the same as now, except those, like, because we do, like, we no one says I hate poor people, but we don't exactly go, hey, how's it going, Jerry? If Jerry's pushing a cart and is kind of dirty and has been on the street for a long time, or people that are adjacent to those situations. So that's not exactly different from how of the stigma that's associated with the poor today.
Yeah, that's true.
It would just be then, you have the stigma, but you're not homeless, apparently. Or most likely.
Yeah, that's true. don't know. It's a tough concept that I'm still not entirely on board with, but
I like it.
it's something to think about.
I like it so much I'm considering in the future, seriously considering. So I'm thinking about moving to another country in the future, maybe, because of this.
One of these days, I just hope to have a summer home in London. So that's all I want to do as far as moving out of the country goes.
Okay. Have a nice little posh lifestyle. Have a pipe and a bit of tea.
Yeah, that would be my evening every day.
The evening every day.
After a contemplative visit to the Tate. I hear it's a good museum. I believe that's the museum that has an entire I'm gonna get his name wrong. W.J.M. Turner. I know Turner is he's a painter. I can't think of his initials though. He has I think 3 at the beginning. But yeah, I think they have the Tate has an entire wing devoted to him, and I really enjoy his artwork. So that'd be an enjoyable lifestyle for me if I had the extravagance for it. I doubt I ever will, but you never know.
Nice little happy, hopeful note.
Yeah, now that you've made me horribly depressed, thinking about all of our social problems.
Oh, so many issues to work out. And I think this was a good talk.
I think it was too.
Yeah.
We had an interesting. It was enjoyable.
Yeah.
Maybe next episode we can talk about something that doesn't make my frontal lobe feel like it's smoking on fire.
Oh, I can see the flames right now. Goodness. It's a blue smoke, though. I don't know why. It's just blue.
I'm not sure what you're getting at here.
Indigo smoke.
Indigo Smoke? That's actually Rush's new album they're coming out with. Indigo Smoke. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, I guess we'll catch you guys next week.
Yeah, next week, in which we'll be talking about...
Well, actually, it'll just be me next week.
Oh, that's right. It will be. You will be Sans hamster.
Yep. Which means it'll be... I'm not going to say better, but...
Thanks. Thanks for giving me that.
We're not gonna...
Wow.
We're not gonna... Oh, no. You're not going to be Sans Owl, which is what's important.
Oh, man. Do you have a certain person picked out as your special guest?
I do. We're going to... Or I'm going to. You're not going to be around. It's just going to be me. I am planning to, if I can. I'm pretty sure I can. So if we're silent next week, stuff went wrong. But I'm not planning on that. I'm not hoping for it. I'm going to be interviewing Terrifying Jellyfish, TJ for short.
Terrifying Jellyfish.
Yeah, if you're in St. Louis and you're in the dev community or just know about it in general, he's sort of this up-and-coming guy working for Happy Badger Studios, who has this game that he made in high school when I was going with him. He's a old high school friend from Crossroads, and he had this game called Fish, where you're a little fish eating other fishes, and you sort of evolve and grow bigger and bigger and eat them. Sort of a simple game. At first you're sort of like, whatever. And then you start playing it more and more and you're like, oh, cool, this is actually kind of cool, even though it's sort of like a very simple mechanic and stuff to use.
So,
but yeah.
Was this a friend that you plugged on an earlier episode, if I remember?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that'll be interesting.
Yeah, it will be. I think so. I think we're going to talk about either video games or maybe the dev community at large, something like that.
It sounds like you're saying the deaf community.
Dev.
Which
developers.
In all honesty, is the last group that we want to target with this podcast.
I don't know. We could have subtitles. They could read.
I'm not going through with this entire episode and subbing it. That's never going to happen.
It could happen. I don't know. We could hire an intern.
If we get like actually popular, which won't happen. But if we happen, I don't know.
We already reached 7. It could happen.
7 million's the next. Yeah.
Yep.
Yes, we're going to be reaching out to the deaf community. We're not going to expect a big
But yeah,
response.
dev community.
Dev.
Dev community. So either that or video games or something else, maybe entirely. I might be fickle and go like, hey, let's talk about George Washington's wooden teeth. And he'll be like, bruh, why? Why am I here talking about teeth?
Will he actually say bruh?
He might, but ironically. Mostly ironically, though.
Okay.
Breh.
Alright.
Okay.
Well, it's been a good talk.
Yeah.
You all look forward to Guy and the jellyfish next week.
Okay. Well, I guess that's it.
That is it.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of our Happy Guys. I know I enjoyed it, and I know that Owl Guy enjoyed it. It was quite nice for both of us. The music you heard in the intro was the song Grindstone by the band Hearst Pileup. What you're listening to now is the song Stand Up featuring Pipe Choir by the band The Marion Circle Drum Brigade, which I think is a fabulous name for a drum brigade. If you enjoyed us, you can hit us up on Facebook. We have one of those. You can follow us and all that sort of good stuff. If you enjoy that Owl Guy more than me, shame on you, but to each his own. You can follow him on Twitter at ThatOwlGuy. You can also check out his blog, which is honestly quite nice, at owlguy.wordpress.com. If you enjoyed this episode, there are more coming out every week, so don't worry, there will always be more. I hope you enjoyed. Bye.